Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Green again, and here we are continuing on with Unit 2. In Unit 2 of Pre-Cal, we started looking at quadratic functions, right? Well, right at the moment, we're at the point of the quadratic functions where we're going to start talking about, well, my mouse needs to be where it needs to be. Okay, there it is. We're going to start talking about transforming the function. Okay, what do we mean by transformations? Well, if you remember back to geometry, we talked about some transformations. We talked about moving things along one direction or another, moving them in the x direction and the y direction and so forth. And we called that a slide or a translation, if you remember correctly. Well, we can do the same thing with the graph of a quadratic. We just need to know how to move it and where the things that move it are. Here's the essential rule. You want it to move in the horizontal direction, you've got to affect x. You want it to move in the vertical direction, you've got to affect y. So what are we going to do? If it's in a format where I've got x and I want to move it certain number of units in that horizontal direction, I change the value of x to x plus something. Well, that moves it horizontally. If I say x minus something, it moves it horizontally. That's where the movement occurs. If I'm affecting the x in the horizontal direction, it goes in the x. If I'm affecting the vertical direction, I need to affect the y value. Well, that's the value that's in front of uh, out here in front of the equation, the y value. So how would I do that? I would change the values out here at the end. So look at this. I'm changing it from a plus 1 to a minus 1. What did it do? It moved it from positive 1 to negative 1. It affected the parabola vertically. Okay? That's what we're going to be looking at doing in this particular lesson. Okay? Here we are affecting them horizontally, left and right. There's the plus 1, there's the minus 1. See how it moved it, left and right. Okay? The plus 1 moved it to the left. It seems backwards, but remember, we're talking about squaring that term, so it's going to make it look a little bit weird, but it does. You put a positive number in there, it moves it to the left. You put a negative number in there, it moves it to the right. But that's what we're going to be looking at. Okay? So what about, well, this is just the rule here, the vertical and the horizontal translations. You affect the x if you want it to move to the x direction. You affect the y if you want it to move in the y direction. Okay? Well, how do you flip a parabola over? Well, you know what? One of the things we want to talk about is flipping or reflecting across the y-axis. How do we do that? Well, one of the things that we would want to do is affect the x value. If we affect the x value, we flip it on the y-axis. And I went too far. There it is. So if I want to take
Adding the
this
negative
one,
sign in front of the x produces a reflection across the y-axis, which changes the vertex from negative 1, 1 to positive 1, 1.
okay? He said it just like I would. See how they're going from a plus 1 to a I'm sorry, they're taking the x and they're taking it to a negative x here. Well, that's what's causing it to go from here in the blue one to here in the red one. Does that make sense? The x caused that type of a change. Let's go back to the one I skipped over there. That was the one that's talking about flipping the parabola over and making a rainbow or making a Texas hook'em horns. Well, the one that's sitting there right now is the Texas hook'em horn, and if I put a negative sign in front of it, it flips it over and makes it into a rainbow. Affecting the y causes it to reflect over the other axis, right? Those seems pretty straightforward. I don't think there's any much in that you could misconstrue. When you want to affect the x, you affect the x. When you want to affect in the y, you affect the y. Now, the other thing that they talk about doing is dilating. Dilating is where we're going to change the size of it. Remember, these other two didn't change the size of the parabola, just changed its location or flipped it over a little bit. Now we're going to talk about changing the size of it a little bit. If we go from a 2x squared to a 1/2 x squared, you can see the bigger the number, the skinnier the parabola. The smaller the number, the wider the parabola. Okay? Works for any of those numbers, and I just want you to make certain you understand that real closely. Okay? So, more of that. The other thing that it talks about doing here, if you they call it vertically stretching or shrinking the parabola, all they're talking about doing is a dilation. You can see I speak from a geometric perspective. They're doing that dilation of the object. They're making it get wider or they're making it get skinnier. That's all it is. Okay? So, trying to relate it to things that you might have learned in the past, trying to relate it to courses you might have had in the past, get onto this last screen. It's a concentration game. You're going to have to match up different things. I think it could be kind of fun to do. So, hope you enjoy the lesson. And don't forget to do the checkup and the quiz. Get them done, get them turned in. I'll talk to you later.